Canva. Canva. It has become so popular because it's such a great tool to, if you need a quick fix, or if you don't really have that much design experience, it makes it really easy to use. And I've definitely used it for social media templates. It's an online-based design tool, so it's more inclined to work better with web stuff. Print, it's a tricky business. And more print shops are getting files from Canva, and it's driving them a little bit crazy. Now I'm gonna help you get those Canva files as print ready as possible to the best of my ability, with the disclaimer that it's really not gonna be as truly print ready as it should be. And you just have to know that, and you're gonna have to tell your printer as well to give them the heads up, just to be kind about it. The other thing is the print CMYK settings are only available in the Pro account. If you don't have a Pro account, stop, go get one, or don't design print in Canva. But first, let's go over the basics of print really quickly. When you're dealing with print, you need to make sure you have your document set up properly with bleed, and we'll go into that. And then we're gonna look at resolution and images, making sure everything's high enough quality and appropriate for print. And then we'll look at color space, which is CMYK. And that is all the things you need to really make sure your Canva file is going to show up the right way when it hits the printer. Let me show you how it's all done, and let's go. So here we are in Canva, and again, I'm going to stop you right there. If you don't have a Pro Canva account, you should not be designing in print. The functionality is just not there for print design in Canva. So if you have a Pro account, then we're going to continue. The first thing you're going to want to do is actually create your document size. Talking to print shops and things like that, the most common, or one of the most common things that happens when the designs from Canva come in, they aren't even the right document size. So something like this, you go and you're like, okay, I love this template. I'm going to click this template, and then they'll go create. So this is an Instagram post size. Sometimes it'll be an 8.5 by 11, and then they want a poster size. So the print shop has to scale it up, but it doesn't scale proportionately. It really won't. And then it's a nightmare for the printer. Your design doesn't look the way it needs to be. So I really need you to create your document size from the get-go. And if you do want to use something like this template design here, only if you have the Pro account, and again, you're not even in here if you're not using the Pro account for print. With the Pro account, you can resize a design. So if you really want to use something like this template, you can go in and choose the custom size to, let's say we're doing a letter size, 8.5 by 11, and we'll go from there. Copy and resize, or just resize this design. And then it's going to auto do it for you. So you're that's the only way I would say. But in general, just looking up designs that start in your file size is the better way to go. Or like I said, just doing a brand new, create new design, custom size, 8.5 by 11 inches. And I'm going to do that again, 8.5 by 11 inches, create new design. It will give you templates as well when you started with that design. It'll give you templates on the side here to kind of work with. So yeah, so that's what I say. Document setup, super important, again, to make everything flow nicely and for you to have the correct outcome in your print. So now that you're looking at your document that you just created, you're going to go to File and Settings. Using these settings are going to help you create a more print-ready end result. So this is the first place to go after you have your new document. We are going to show rulers and guides. So mine have them set on already, but you want to make sure that yours says show rulers and guides. It's annoying that you have to go in every time, but yep. Show margins, yep, which is this line that's going to show up there, and I'll explain that in a minute. So show margins, and the bleed. So show print bleed. Mine is on currently. Yours would look like this if you didn't have it on. You're gonna go File, Show Print Bleed. Okay, print bleed, if you don't know what that is the area of, it's an 1/8 of an inch where your design extends past the trim size of your paper. So if your paper is 8.5 by 11, like you want your final design to be 8.5 by 11, then you are going to turn the bleed on and you have 1/8 of an inch all the way around and move your design to that line. What happens when it's a print production process, it's a manufacturing thing. So when your paper is hitting the press and going, there's slight shifts that happen naturally. And if you don't have that extra bleed on the edge, that quick line there of where your design would be trimmed is potentially shifting a little bit. So when you go to trim a fat stack like that, and there's that little bit of micro movement, there's a good chance that the white paper, like the natural paper, could leave a little sliver of white down the edge because it wasn't accounted for, right? So the bleed, make sure that if there is any movement, whenever it trims, it's at least going to look like your design, you know, the edge of the photo and all of that stuff. So bleed is super important for print. And we've turned that on now, so that's really good. Now the next thing is to actually create a safety area, your margin. You can't adjust the margin size in Canva, which is a little silly, but it says about 1 inch around here is what it looks like. But I'm going to go in and add guides. The guides will look a little crazy here. This is really much for like magazine layout design and all of that. It's a pretty classic column guide there. But we are going to make our own, which is 1 column, 1 row, and nothing on the gaps there. And we're going to add 1/4 of an inch. So that's 0.25 and 0.25. So this is something that we call safe, like a safe zone, a safety area. And this is going to help you keep your design elements away from the edge. Oftentimes we see things like type goes in here, and then someone is going to kind of put their type way too close to the edge, right? And let me try and zoom in here. Yeah. There we go. So if your trim line, which is this line here, if your trim line is there and your type is there, we talked about movement in your design, right? So if it's too close to that edge, it's potentially could get cut off. Plus, as a designer rule of thumb, we like white space. So a lot of the times you want to have stuff a little bit around, a little bit more breathing room, and this will help you keep things in that natural space that's going to protect your design and look a little bit more, I guess, professional and things like that, designed professionally. So that is the setup there for your design using the guides, the print bleed, and all of that stuff. So now that we're here, we're just going to use a template just to kind of get this thing rolling, and so I can kind of talk a bit more about it. So let's try and find a little template. Oh my goodness, I should not be taking much time on this one here. Okay, let's run with this. Simple. So the next thing we're going to talk about is images and resolution. So that's really important in print because it's going to make sure that your images, they need to be 300 dpi. It's going to make sure that your images are going to print crispy, nice and crisp instead of blurry. So typically on screen, and when you take a photo, when you're grabbing stuff off the internet, it will typically be 72 dots per inch, 72 dpi. So if you have a little square that's an inch by inch square, for screen, there's 72 pixels in that little square, and for print, it's at 300. So if you're taking a square that has 72, and you're trying to size it up and force it to that print resolution, which is 300, it's going to look a little fuzzy because you're forcing it, you're upscaling it, you're forcing it to be bigger than its intended size, and that's when you start to get that fuzzy image. Now, 250 dpi is the lowest resolution in order to get away with it, and it's still being okay, but 300 is ideal. Now, the thing with Canva is you don't have options to see that DPI. And it can get a little tricky because you're then you're upscaling your images more than you are, I guess, more than you might know. Scaling blind is what I'll say. So let's say this image here started, so actually, so it starts here. Let's say right now it's 300 DPI. But I mean, you don't know that unless you've created your image to be this exact size and 300 DPI. If I go and I scale it up like this, I'm now, again, taking something that's 300 and going past. And so my resolution is going to be cut in half because I'm trying to stretch and expand the pixels more than what they're capable of doing. And you can't tell that until you kind of get to the end of the whole thing. And it's so easy to just go ahead and scale stuff around because that's how Canva is made. So a perfect example here is I grabbed this stock photo from the internet, and we're going to look at it in Photoshop, which I have open already, actually. So this image, sometimes images off the internet are actually scaled to 300 pixels per inch. A lot of photographers and things will do that now. But yeah, so this one here is 5 inches by 3 inches at 300. Cool. Now, if I want to make this photo a lot larger, because my document is 8.5 by 11, it's a letter size. So if I want to make it maybe the full width of the design to kind of match where I am here, if I take that image and I drop it into here, come on, will it let me? Okay, well, that's fine. We'll just do this. We're gonna go here and I'm gonna scale it, massive, beautiful. We're gonna leave it there. I mean, maybe I want it even more. I'm like, ooh, I like this crop here. Okay, so now I've scaled this up. And you notice how I have it going to the bleed as well, right? You want to make sure that anything we're designing, we're accounting for that bleed. So now if I was to go and quickly export this, and we'll go into the proper exporting settings in a bit. Let me get out of here, get that out of here. File, download. Just gonna kind of quickly, share, download, PDF print. We'll go into this later. And then just, just download quickly. So while that's downloading there, the other thing I'll mention as well is the graphics and the type in Canva. So we'll look at that resolution I was talking about, but graphics and type in Canva is vector, so that's a really positive thing. And I'll talk about it a little bit more when we go into the exporting thing. But the fact that vector, meaning it's an infinitely scalable graphic type, so by having the type be that way, or the graphics, when I say graphics, more of these elements, these kind of like designed illustrative elements, these are all vector. So that's a plus for Canva right now. But we're going to hold that thought and we're going to go back into this image. So now that image PDF is downloaded, we're going to take a quick look at it. So I've opened it up in my PDF reader here, Acrobat, and I'm going to go and use print production and output preview. This is a designery kind of tool. It's a great thing to have. But when I click on this object inspector, when I click it here, I can see here that my resolution is only 9 pixels per inch. So it's reduced it from 300 pixels per inch at the original size, which we know from Photoshop, the intended size for this image is 5.5-ish by almost 4. And we've scaled it up to quite large. Here you go. So it's almost like 113 inches or whatever, which seems like a lot. So I don't know if that's actually accurate, but either way, I know it's larger than 5. But this, this resolution is way too low for print. So if you are going to be using images like this, you can go and see if you don't have access to Photoshop, you can still use kind of some image editing software that allows you to resize. You can Google pixel to DPI converters and sort of get an intended size. Ideally, something like this, if I know I want a really large image, like if I want this image, what is this size actually? I don't know if it even, yeah, you have to, that's the other thing with Canva, like you have to be able to you have to scale it like this instead of being able to see the actual dimensions of it. Unless I'm doing it wrong, but I feel like I've never been able to see the actual dimensions without going like this. Okay, so this is around, right now, it's about 8.5 tall, and it's 12 inches wide. So I would go and find kind of an image or something that I'm like, okay, 8.5 tall, making sure that I'm starting in that range, or my image sizes are going to be really, really big. And you can find the equivalent of, like I said, the pixel size to the inches using a Google kind of pixel to DPI, pixel to inch converter. There's a lot of options out there. And then pick an image that starts in that. And even still, like, you need to make sure it's 300 DPI. So if you need to find an image that's a lot larger, way larger, then when you scale it down, like if I had an image that started at this size, and vice versa, instead of having a 72 DPI and going up to 300, if I have a 72 DPI that's huge, larger than my 8.5 by 11, when I'm scaling it down to fit, I'm compressing those pixels and I'm forcing it to actually be a higher dot per inch. So there's potential to take a 72 DPI image and force it to be higher resolution by scaling it down like this and matching it to around a 300, or again, 250 at the minimum for print. So we talked about images, and I did mention, like I said, I mentioned that the type and the graphics do act as a vector, which is great. But what happens, because there's no way to actually outline your text in Canva. So I guess to clarify, we're talking about text. We're talking about typography here, and there's going to be a little issue with that in Canva. So when you don't have the option to change your type into shapes, which was called outlining, you have essentially a live text object, a live type object, like this, where I can type it. So if your printer needs to edit your file for whatever reason, I'm going to open it up in Illustrator just to show you. Sometimes they need to edit a file because, again, like if you're doing the sizing things properly, that's better. But a lot of times printers have to go in there and they're making the file sizes correct and all of that stuff. But here you can see that when they open it up, they don't have access to these fonts because it's not outlined. An outlined font looks like this. So I have my font here. If I create outlines, do you see how they're all shapes now? So that is ideal for printers because when they go in, they don't need your fonts in order to make changes on your file, which Canva doesn't allow you to do. So unless you have a perfectly good file, there's a chance that this kind of causes some issues for your printer to pre-press department. What you can do is use fonts that are a bit more accessible. Whether you have access to those fonts directly, that's the best because then you can supply them to your printer alongside your design. I know in Canva, you can actually, if you have the brand options, you can actually upload your own fonts and things like that. So that's helpful too, and then you have that lined up. What happens the most though is someone uses a proprietary font to Canva, and that would be something like Canva Sans, which is a nice little font, but it is only available on the Canva app. It's not something that exists in a font file elsewhere. So when your printer tries to go in, they literally can't get this font. They can't get it. So some of the other ones they might have already in their large libraries of fonts and things, or they can get them from the internet or whatever it is that they need to do to get that. But if you're able to supply fonts and use something like this one was in Times New Roman, condensed, that's a little bit more of a common font, so that would be helpful for your printers. Now the next thing we're going to talk about is color. So with Canva Pro, you have the option of exporting, and we'll go into the export settings more, but you have the option of exporting for CMYK if you have the Pro account. And what that does is it takes your whole file and is going to force convert it from RGB, which is screen, red, green, blue, into CMYK, which are the inks for process in printing. When you're taking those RGB colors and changing them to CMYK, it can get a little funky sometimes. So one of the things mainly that happens with this though, is the blacks. So the black in Canva, because the entire software of Canva is exclusively RGB. You can't choose a different color that is in CMYK. All these hex codes are web-based colors. It's a web-based Illustrator designing tool. So even in my tests where I have pulled in the color code for a CMYK black for RGB, which is like if I take this and I try and go into, change the color mode here. Okay, RGB color mode. And I'm taking this color and I want it to be CMYK black, which is 100% K, that's that. So this would be my hex code ideally for something that's a bit more CMYK black. So I'm going to take that hex code and I'm going to put it in Canva here. You can see how it's a little bit more gray than a typical black. Like if this actually, I don't even think is full black, but we're going to make it full black, black, black. So there we go. I'm going to take this again and make this full black, black, black. Okay, there you go. You can see the difference in how that image or that color is different. And that's pretty typical because, again, CMYK, just the 1K, it is a little bit more, you're not having all the other pixels going into it. You're not on a screen. It does look a bit more muted in real life. So I'm going to show you the difference on these as well. I mean, either way, like this should be more close to CMYK, but when we export it in this next bit, you're going to see how the colors are not ideal. And essentially, when you are designing an RGB, it has a larger gamut of colors. It has more possibilities because it's backlit with white. In real life, you don't have that backlight. So some of the really neon colors, let's grab, you know what? Actually, let's do another one like this. I'm going to grab a crazy color. So let's see here. I'm going to grab this like really bright color. Can I make it even brighter? No. Okay. So I'm going to grab this color and we're going to export and you'll see. This color is not doable in regular CMYK process. You can use a Pantone, which is a spot color, which is a specialty made ink that does it. But for regular printing, like most people would be doing, especially in Canva, because you don't have the option to do spot colors, it would be CMYK. And so we're going to export all this and I'm going to show you what I mean. So now moving into the export phase. So you are going to go to File. You're going to go to download, or I mean, you can also go to share, and then I think the download button's there. Yeah. So when you're downloading for print, you have to use the PDF print setting, 100%. You want crop marks and bleeds because we took all that time to do that. Actually, now that I see it, look, my image isn't all the way to my bleed line here. So I want to make sure that that's all the way here, like this, okay? So now when I go back, PDF printing, yeah. So crop marks and bleeds, yes. So the crop marks are indicating where the trim size is. So that's where like your file needs to be cut to. And then the bleed extends past it. So that's that little special safe zone that we like. I'm not going to flatten PDF. Don't flatten PDF. Remember we talked about how the vector, the infinite scalability of the graphics and the type, that is a positive thing. It allows for crisper lines. So when we flatten PDF, it turns the entire thing into a JPEG. And unless it's kind of perfect and all of that stuff, the print company, like your printer, can't edit your file because it's just a JPEG. And like I said, you're losing that capability of just the pristine, extra crispness that a vector thing would give you. So we're leaving it at that. CMYK has to be CMYK. If you are using the free account, you don't get that option, and it's just complicated. It's not worth printing. It's going to look crazy, and your printers are going to probably be mad at you. They won't tell you, but they'll be mad at you. So we're going to hit download here. and it's gonna download. And then we're gonna take a look at the coloring, because I told you that the black should be kind of more CMYK, and also just in general, what happens when you are using an RGB software into black. Okay, right out the gate, remember how I talked about that green is impossible? So you wouldn't have been able to choose a color within a safe CMYK zone. So you're gonna get your file and you're gonna go, why is this so muted? Why does this not look? If you don't have that experience as a designer, maybe a lot of time people, are kind of using this software without that design experience. If you are a designer, you typically know that RGB colors are going to be muted. But yeah, this color is not producible. So then you're kind of getting that misstep there. And the cream looks a little different, right? So all of your colors are going to be forced into CMYK, and you're not getting what you are thinking you're designing on screen. On the next part, so we talked about how it's an RGB black. It starts there. This is the CMYK-ish black, right? Because I kind of did that thing. When you have these colors, even though it's in a CMYK space, because we chose the CMYK colors, it is creating way too much ink coverage on this. So what I mean by that, let me see if I can get this a little bit bigger for us. No, I won't. It won't. Okay, there we go. So you can see here, let me see if I can bring my face back. You can see here, I'm going to move away, but you can see this here where the percentage is. So when I'm hovering over here, you can see it says 319% ink coverage, right? I know it's kind of moving around and stuff, but on this black here, it has 84% cyan, 75% magenta ink, 60% yellow, and 100% black. That is way too much. This is supposed to be just black, which is only needing to be 100% black, process black. 319% in general, 280, 250 is kind of the max where you'd want to be in percentage of color. You can go up to 300 in images, and the ink, adding too much ink to your design like this creates problems at the press. It creates a little bit more chaos. But even still, when you're trying to print something that's 100% black and you want it to just look black, when you start adding all these other colors into it, especially with smaller type, something like this that down here where it says reallyGreatSite.com, if you are working with, let me zoom out here. If you're working with tiny type like this, there's something called misregistration. So the printer prints each layer of color. That's how it works. Let's take a look so I can just show you. So this is how your print process works. So you have your cyan that comes in, right? So you have a cyan, I'll put that black in there. You have a cyan layer, you've got the magenta that comes in, the yellow, and then the black is in there, right? So that's kind of like how that runs. So when you're trying to lay each layer down, if you have tiny type with all of this extra color in it, it's laying down a cyan, a magenta, a yellow, a black. And when it's small like that, there's a real big opportunity or a real big potential for it to be misregistered. So then you have all these other colors on the edges of your type that are kind of bleeding through, and it just is not clean. Plus your printer pre-press department are going to be upset because again, they have to go in and change all of these blacks to proper black. And this CMYK one that I said should be just CMYK based on kind of like how I did it. This also is at 283% coverage, and it is using cyan, it's using magenta, yellow, and that black. So that isn't ideal either. So if you're going to be sending anything in Canva to your printer that has black ink in it, and even just any color really, because a lot of the time you might be just sliding scales and some of that ink coverage can hit 300. It can hit a lot of colors. So if you're using Canva for print, already you have to let your printer know so that the pre-press department can change all of your blacks properly. So you are knowingly sending a file that isn't print ready at all. It can't be. If you're using any black or any of the colors and stuff, it's not print ready. So letting your printer know that ahead of time, it's at least a courteous thing saying, hey, this was designed in Canva. The blacks are going to be a little bit crazy. So while we're in here, I'm just going to recap here. We've got with this little, you can see we got our crop marks here. and we have our bleed. Now, the other thing I just noticed now, which I hadn't seen before, is actually the bleed lines don't really extend past the crops. So typically in a design, in trim marks, the trim marks actually kind of extend a little bit into the design so that it meets more closely to this corner, which is going to be your trim line. So when you have full bleed in Canva, it does indicate where they are, but yeah, it's not actually, it's kind of covering it up. The bleed is a little bit funny here. So, but that is to indicate that it will trim there, and that's what crop marks look like in a Canva PDF. So we talked about bleed and document setup, making sure your document is the correct size and you have all of those margins and stuff turned on. We talked about the image resolution, making sure your image is at 300 DPI at the most, using a pixel to DPI converter, just being really aware of it, or going in knowing that your images might not be the correct DPI and accepting that when you get to the printer. Then we talked about the fonts, the issues with the typography when your printer doesn't have access to that and if they need to make changes. And then we looked at color, which is a little bit chaotic, right? And is always going to be using RGB colors, which is not ideal for print. It's going to force it into CMYK, and it's just, you're not creating a print-ready file from the get-go. And then exporting properly, we turned those crops and bleed marks on, we used PDF print, and we did choose the CMYK setting. We want to avoid flattening, so we don't use that. And all in all, at the very end of it, let your printer know that it's designed in Canva. Let them know so that they can troubleshoot it and they're aware and they will thank you a bit more for it. So to sum it all up, we are not designing for print in Canva unless you have the Pro account. We are setting up our document to the correct size with bleed and making sure things aren't too close to the edge. We are using high quality 300 DPI images to the right size. We are using fonts that are a bit more accessible to your printers, not the Canva Sans proprietary fonts. And if you can, supply your printer with the fonts you use. When we're exporting, we're using the PDF print setting. We're turning on crops and bleed. We are not flattening. We are making sure we're using CMYK. And then we also know that the CMYK isn't really true CMYK, and the blacks will need to be converted. So we are going to let our printers know, right? We're going to let them know that it's a Canva file and that they need to fix our blacks, because we like to be kind to our printer. We want our printers to make sure our stuff looks good when it's printed. So Canva isn't really made for print, but with these little tips and tricks, we're at least getting a little closer to a print-ready file.